In this lesson, we are going to be putting together everything that we've learned in Chapter 8 so far, or in the integer unit, which is adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing integers, all within one problem, as well as some problem solving like word problems. So things to be aware of is be careful, and secondly, you are not going to be allowed to use a calculator for the unit test for this chapter, so practice well. So first of all, something to be aware of is a math expression can omit positive signs or brackets. So it's just something to look out for. So for example, if you saw the question 2 minus 3 times negative 4 divided by, and then big brackets, 1 minus negative 3, that could be the same as positive 2 minus positive 3. So I'm just adding brackets and positive signs where there are none. So this number 1 could also be positive 1 minus negative 3. So these two questions, or those two math expressions, actually mean the exact same thing. So just be aware of that as you're working on these problems. You can get rid of the positive signs and brackets as well around the positive numbers if you'd like to. So just be aware of that. As we move into these two questions, and then we're going to look at something called mean, something to be aware of, you've probably heard of this before, is to make sure that as you're working through a math problem, you're always going about it using the order of operations. So the order of operations is something you've probably heard of, the acronym BEDMAS. The only thing that I've had students in the past misinterpret is when they get to the DM and AS. It is not the case that division always comes before multiplication, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But it is always the case that brackets come first, so any operations inside of brackets come first. And it is the case, we're not going to look at exponents in this particular unit, so we're going to skip the E part of BEDMAS. But it is the case that division and multiplication come next. But just be aware that division and multiplication, so divide and multiply, division and multiply, you go from left to right. So whichever one, so if you look at this question here, you would do the multiplying first because it's further to the left. So dividing and multiplying happen at the same time from left to right. And the same thing's true about adding and subtracting. If your subtracting is further to the left, you would do the subtracting first. Okay, so add and subtract from left to right. So let's look at a few questions. If at any point in time you want to pause this video and rewind it or try and predict some of this yourself, you may want to do that. So let me highlight a few operations for you. So the operations here are subtracting, multiplying, dividing, and again, subtracting here. Okay, so the one that's going to come first, and how I tend to do these problems is I put around a box around the operation that comes first, is the one that's in brackets. So we're going to simplify this first, and again be writing this down and think about the answers. Something we learned when we looked at the adding and subtracting integers lesson before we started this unit was that subtracting a negative is equivalent or the same as simple addition. So this is the same as negative 1 plus 3. And negative 1 plus 3 is equivalent to negative 1, starting at negative 1 and going up the number line. So it's equivalent to 2. Okay? Once we're done that, and we have simplified the first operation, just write down the rest of what hasn't been simplified. So we can cross this out, and now we have these remaining 3. So you want to keep yourself organized. I would always suggest as you're doing these questions to work down your page. In fact, I'd almost insist that you work down your page and not across your page. So the next operation, we've simplified the brackets, is to look at dividing and multiplying, and the one that happens first is the one that's further to the left. So in this case, this multiplying is further to the left than the dividing. So 3 times negative 4, it's a positive times a negative, and we learned from the sign rule that a positive times a negative is a negative. Okay, so we can cross this out now and rewrite what we haven't crossed out. So we've got 2 minus negative 12 divided by 2. So the next operation that we are going to simplify is, so think to yourself if it's a subtraction or the dividing, and in this case it is the dividing, because dividing comes before addition or subtraction. So negative 12 divided by 2 with the sign rule is equivalent to negative 6. And now we have the final operation, which is 2 minus negative 6. And ask yourself, is that simple addition or is that simple subtraction? If you understood the integers, this subtracting a negative is the same as simple addition. So you could rewrite this as 2 plus 6, which is equivalent to 8. So these questions are quite heavy. They take a lot of work, and I'd always suggest putting a box around the operation that you're working on currently, and then simplify that, and then rewrite the operations that you haven't dealt with at the moment on the next line. So what I'm doing in this next question is identifying all the operations. So all the operations are as follows. We have an adding, we have a dividing, a subtracting, a multiplying, and another adding inside the brackets. So again, predict the first operation. And the first operation we're going to simplify is 6 plus negative 2. And adding a negative is the same as simple subtraction. So this is the same as 6 minus 2, which is 4. Okay? I'm just going to rewrite the rest. So don't try and do these problems all in one step. You're going to get lost, you're going to be confused, and you're going to confuse me as I look at these problems with you. So we're going to look at next, are we doing the adding? Are we going to simplify the dividing? Are we going to simplify the subtracting? And what you're noticing is, am I using the same colors throughout this problem? Or are we going to simplify the multiplying? And in this case, dividing and multiplying, the dividing is further to the left. So we're going to simplify this dividing here. And negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Okay? So now we can rewrite the rest. So in this case, our next operation is going to be, well, you can ask yourself, is it going to be the adding? Okay, and we can put the negative inside brackets here. Is it going to be the subtracting, or is it going to be the multiplying? And as you know, in this case, it's going to be the multiplying. So 3 times 4 is 12. Okay, let's rewrite the rest of the problem. We're still working through this. This is negative 4 plus negative 3 minus 12. So in this case, our next operation, I'm not going to highlight them now, is the adding, because it's further to the left. And adding a negative is equivalent to simple subtracting. So this is negative 4 minus 3. Negative 4 minus 3 is negative 7. And then we have negative 7 minus 12. And that answer is going to be, so it's simple subtraction. Start at negative 7, move down the number line 12, and we've got negative 19. Okay? The last part of this lesson is just an aside. So really important that you know how to do order of operations, that you work in order, and that you do one operation at a time. So maybe I should put a box around this here as the last operation that we did. So beyond that, we're going to look at something called mean. Mean is exactly the same as the average. Okay, so for example, if it was, so let me not look at this problem right away. If we had temperatures of 10 degrees Celsius and 12 degrees Celsius, the average would be 11 degrees Celsius. Okay, that would be the average. Now it's a little bit more difficult, so I'm just going to erase that. It's a little bit more difficult when we're dealing with negative numbers. But what we do is the same process. We're going to determine the sum of the integers, so we're going to add them all up, and then we're going to divide that sum by the number of integers. Okay, so in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to, so the idea is we're going to add these all up. We'll do that in a bit. And then we're going to divide, so take all those, add them up, and we're going to divide that by 4. And that will give us the average temperature out of these 4 numbers. So let's jump into that, and that's how we calculate average. So in this particular question, we are going to be calculating negative 5 plus 0 plus positive 8 plus negative 13, and maybe just do one of these at a time. Okay, so negative 5 plus 0 is negative 5. Negative 5 plus positive 8. Well, adding a positive is the same as simple addition, so that's negative 5 plus 8, and that's equivalent to 3. Okay. And 3 plus negative 13 is equivalent to simple subtraction, so that's the same as 3 minus 13, and that's equivalent to negative 10. Okay, so that's the sum, and now what we need to do is divide that sum by the number of integers. So divide that by 4, negative 10 divided by 4. The average daily temperature is negative 2.5 degrees Celsius out of those 4. Okay?